Please buy boxed lunches." The little boy, who looked to be about 5 years old, clung to the woman, his face on the verge of tears. At that moment, I had stepped out during my lunch break to buy a boxed lunch. Buying a boxed lunch wasn't the issue, but the ones lined up at this unfamiliar boxed lunches shop didn't look very appealing. "Would you like to buy boxed lunches?" The woman behind the stall spoke in a thin, weak voice. She looked utterly exhausted. I couldn't help but think she looked unhealthy, or rather, unlucky. An unremarkable woman selling equally unremarkable boxed lunches. Honestly, I didn't feel like eating one. "Please, buy boxed lunches." The little boy, still clinging to his mother, turned his face toward me, his eyes pleading desperately. I couldn't bring myself to just walk away. Reluctantly, I bought one. But at the time, I had no idea that this simple boxed lunch would end up changing my life in such a big way. My name is Tom. I'm 26 and work as a salesperson. I've only just started visiting clients on my own. Deciding the right balance between current clients and new prospects. Figuring out which areas to cover. It's all up to me now. And it's tough. There's pressure and responsibility, but at least there's also freedom. My days revolve around client visits, and the best part of each day is eating lunch at the employee cafeteria. Our cafeteria isn't just cheap, it's actually better than most, with healthier options. But what really makes it special is Mary, who's like everyone's mom. She's always smiling, always giving us a boost of energy. And when someone's feeling down, she'll subtly check in with them. It really feels like having a mom at work. Lately, though, Mary's been having a hard time. 2 staff members suddenly quit, and now lunchtime is overwhelming for her. We're hiring, but no one's applying. It's just a few hours during lunch. But do you know anyone who might be interested, Tom? I wanted to help Mary, but I didn't know anyone I could refer. Then one day, my whole schedule got messed up, and I missed lunch, which put me in a bad mood. My client's schedule kept pushing things back, and the only way to make up for lost time was to skip my lunch. I really need to plan my schedule with more buffer time from now on. As I was thinking this and checking my watch, it was already 2 p.m. No matter how fast I moved, there was no way I'd make it to the cafeteria before it closed for lunch. The more I thought about how I couldn't eat, the more I craved food, and my hunger was hitting its peak. That's when I noticed someone selling food up ahead on the street. It was outside a cafe that had been shuttered for about half a year. I'd been there a few times before. The hamburger they served was delicious, and remembering that, I approached the street vendor, feeling hopeful. Seeing the boxed lunches piled up on the table in front of the closed cafe only made my expectations soar. These aren't just any boxed lunches. If it's from that place, it has to be good. What luck, or so I thought. But the moment I looked at the boxed lunches, my excitement deflated. There were no hamburger boxed lunches. The food was unclear and looked unappetizing. There was boiled chicken with some sauce, roast beef that looked brown. The pale part was mashed potatoes. The only other color was the yellow of the omelet. As boxed lunches, they weren't visually appealing at all. I knew it was my own fault for expecting it, but I still felt deceived when it wasn't a hamburger steak. "Would you like to buy a lunchbox?" As I stood there, dumbfounded, I heard a soft voice from a woman nearby. The lunchboxes were being sold by a young woman. Her makeup was light, and her hair was neatly tied back. Her apron was white and looked clean, giving a tidy appearance. Even though she looked clean, the light makeup made the dark circles under her eyes stand out, making her appear extremely tired. She didn't just look tired, she looked unhealthy. Or rather, she looked miserable. The plain appearance of the woman and the unimpressive-looking lunchboxes she was selling didn't exactly make me hungry. Honestly, I didn't feel like eating anything from her, but I had already come all the way here with the intention of buying something, and was standing right in front of her table. She had already recognized me as a potential customer. However, just as I decided I would pass on buying anything, a small boy, about 5 years old, clung to her and said something. I thought he was about to start crying, but no, he wasn't. "Please, buy a lunchbox." He clung to his mother, but his face was turned directly toward me, pleading with desperate eyes. The mother gently patted her son's shoulder. Oh no, honestly, I felt like I'd been trapped. At that moment, a passerby came strolling by, wandering aimlessly towards us. The moment he saw the lunchboxes, he looked visibly disappointed and quickly averted his gaze, walking away without saying a word. It was like he hadn't even noticed someone was selling lunchboxes here. But there I was, standing firmly in place. I could feel the weight of the mother and child's gaze on me. I couldn't bring myself to walk away without buying anything, so I reluctantly bought one of the lunchboxes. And that lunchbox was about to change my life in ways I could never have imagined. Back at work, in the nearly empty employee cafeteria, I took out the lunchbox. The contents were as I'd seen earlier, aside from the omelet. The colors were pretty dull. I sighed softly, and with no real expectations, just wanting to satisfy my hunger, I hesitantly took a bite of the mashed potatoes. And then I was shocked. This is delicious. I had no idea mashed potatoes could taste this good. I was so captivated by the taste that I didn't realize I had already devoured the entire meal. The mashed potatoes, the roast beef, the omelet, everything was astonishingly good. For the first time in my life, I had tasted something that truly surprised me. I actually regretted not buying more. But no, I should be proud of myself for even buying that one lunchbox, given the mood I was in at the time. I was glad I bought it. The taste of that lunchbox was so incredible, it felt like a miracle. It was a revelation to me. The next day, after finishing work earlier than usual, I made my way back to that same store. And again, the same mother and child were there, selling lunchboxes. And once again, people passing by didn't seem interested. If they got close, they quickly turned away, just like the people from the day before. You'd know how good it is if you just took a bite. I had been like them the day before, but now I was getting angry at the passersby who didn't stop to buy. I walked quickly toward the mother and child and stopped in front of their stand. Yesterday's lunchbox was amazing, so I came back for more today. I said it loudly on purpose, then looked at the lunchboxes. There were 5 left, and they all looked the same. Perhaps hearing my words, 2 female office workers approached, and each bought one lunchbox. Now there were only 3 left. All 3 remaining ones, please. The mother looked surprised. Thank you. It's the first time I've sold everything. She must have been really happy. Her thin voice became even more raspy, and I could barely hear her. No, it's just that they were really delicious. As I recalled yesterday's taste, I asked eagerly, wanting to eat them as soon as possible. Is there a place around here where I can eat the boxed lunches? Yesterday I went back to the office to eat, but today I'd love to eat them right away. Well, I don't want to keep my next client waiting. I realized I sounded like a kid, so I tried to cover it up. The mother and child both looked surprised, but then the mother gave me a gentle smile. Well, it's a bit messy, but if you'd like, you can eat inside. I'll make some coffee too. She opened the door next to the shutter for me. Feeling a bit guilty, I walked inside. The atmosphere inside was very different from when the place was open for business. Most of the chairs and tables were stacked in the back. Only a few chairs and 2 tables were set out. One table seemed to belong to the child, with coloring books and drawing pads scattered around. The mother quickly tidied up the books and guided me to the other table. "I'll bring some coffee." "Thank you." I watched her walk toward the kitchen and sat down, but I couldn't relax. The child was staring at me from the other table. The mother returned with the coffee. I thanked her and started eating my boxed lunch, but I quickly realized they were watching me and paused. I offered the other 2 boxed lunches I had bought. "Why don't we eat together? If that's okay with you." "Yay, I'll eat," the child responded energetically, but the mother looked troubled. "Oh no, I have to return the money then." "No, I've already bought them, so today it's my treat." I gently urged her to sit down and handed her the boxed lunches. "If you don't eat, I won't be able to finish mine." She looked apologetic but accepted it. I glanced around the room, avoiding eye contact. Sensing my thoughts, the mother began to explain. "This shop, my father started it, and after he passed, my husband took over. He was really good at cooking. I used to love the hamburgers here." I hesitated, unsure if it was okay to say that, but then the boy looked up. "I love Dad's hamburgers, but we can't eat them anymore." The boy's face turned sad. "Thank you. My husband passed away 6 months ago. It was an accident." Her name was Karen, and her son, Jim, was 5 years old. The shock of losing her husband was so overwhelming that months had gone by without her noticing. Seeing Karen's condition, Jim became unsettled and stopped attending child care. Jim was so worried about me. I promised him I wouldn't cry anymore, so I tried to keep that promise. They also had to move out of their apartment to save money. I thought about reopening the store, but most of our regulars were my husband's fans. I can't cook the way he did. If I served my food, I feel like I would disappoint his customers. Still, she felt she had to do something, so she started selling boxed lunches. But even with the boxed lunches, most customers expect my husband's hamburgers. As she spoke, Karen's eyes began to fill with tears. Jim glared at me. I might have given the impression that I made her cry. "I'm sorry, I was kind of expecting a hamburger too. I mean, the boxed lunch surprised me. It felt a little off at first, but after one bite, everyone realizes it's delicious." These words were from the heart. Just one taste, and they'd know. Karen sighed. "Yes, once someone tries it, they usually come back. Even the businesswoman earlier, she's a regular now. But it's hard to get people to buy that first one. I'm just not good at approaching people. Every time I try, they seem to back away. And my voice gets raspy really fast. I guess I'm trying too hard." Though it was almost as if she was talking to herself. Karen seemed to know well why her boxed lunches weren't selling. Even so, knowing doesn't mean it's something easily fixed. By this point, I was already feeling a desire to help Karen and Jim in any way I could. So I remembered the job openings at our employee cafeteria. "What if you worked outside a little, Karen? Once your mom is feeling better, Jim could go to daycare, right? What do you think, Jim?" Jim nodded. "They're actually hiring at our employee cafeteria. Wouldn't you want to apply?" Even to me, this felt like a good idea. Karen and Jim both seemed interested, so she started preparing her resume and everything right away. The next day, I went back to buy another boxed lunch from Karen and picked up her resume while I was at it. With her resume in hand, I returned to work and headed straight to the employee cafeteria after hours. I called out to Mary, who was tidying up in the kitchen. After a moment, Mary came over, pulling off her thick gloves. "Hey, Tom, The lunch shift is over. What brings you here? I wanted to introduce someone for the job. Just as I handed her the resume, a deep male voice spoke from behind me. That's a relief. If we don't hire soon, Mary's going to collapse. Startled, I turned around to find the CEO standing there. Sir, good afternoon. Even though I hadn't done anything wrong, I felt a cold sweat. The CEO took the resume from my hand and looked at it. His expression grew tense. She's asking for reduced hours. Yes, that's right. Karen has a small child, and she recently became a single mom. Her child is still adjusting to all the changes. So at least for now, she's hoping to work until 3 p.m. I see. Karen, is it? He said, looking down at the resume again. All right, Mary and I will discuss this and get in touch with Karen directly. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I wanted to say more, to sell Karen's strengths better, but the CEO gave me a look that seemed to say, is there anything else? I felt like he was telling me, mind my own business. Well then, I'll be on my way. I nodded to the CEO and returned to my desk. That day, I worked harder than usual. A few days passed, and I couldn't stop by to buy Karen's boxed lunches. Then, on my way to visit a client, I finally had time to head to her shop. I was excited at the thought of having her boxed lunch again, but there were no boxed lunches for sale. When I reached the store, there was a small note on the shutter. No boxed lunches sales today. Disappointed at not being able to enjoy her food, I started worrying about Karen and Jim. What could have happened the last time she opened the door for me? But when I knocked lightly this time, there was no answer. I didn't have her contact information. Her phone number was on her resume, but I thought it would be against the rules to just call her without permission. I wasn't sure what to do, so I looked at my watch. It was too late to make it to the employee cafeteria's lunch service. I grabbed a sandwich from a convenience store for lunch and visited a few clients before heading back to the office. I worked at my desk until the end of the day, and before heading home, I stopped by the employee cafeteria for dinner. Our cafeteria serves dinner too. The hours are from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. and the menu changes daily. There are far fewer people who come for dinner compared to lunch. But for someone like me, who isn't great at cooking, it's really convenient. In the quiet cafeteria, I ordered that day's special. There was no sign of Mary, but a young male part-timer, who I knew from before, gave me an extra large serving of salad as a little perk. As I ate, I could hear Mary's voice. There were other voices, both male and female, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. In the corner of the cafeteria, there was a small, makeshift private room sectioned off with partitions, and it seemed like some kind of meeting was going on there. Eventually, a familiar-looking woman stepped out from behind the partition. Mary's voice became clearer. "Thank you for today, Karen. We'll be in touch with the results soon." The woman turned, saw me, and looked a bit surprised. But then she gave me a warm smile. It was Karen, but Karen seemed to be in a hurry, and left quickly. "Oh, Tom, you're here too." I had been watching Karen leave when Mary walked up to me. Standing next to her was the president. I was nervous, but I couldn't help but ask, "Is Karen going to be hired?" "I can't answer that right now," Mary said, glancing at the president. The president walked directly over to me and sat in the chair across from me. "So you've only recently met Karen, right?" "Yes, about a month ago. I was visiting a client and bought one of Karen's boxed lunches. It was so delicious that we started talking, and I learned about her situation, so I introduced her to the employee cafeteria." Mary sat down next to the president. "So it really was just a coincidence, then?" The president nodded slowly in response to Mary's comment. Karen's father. He was an old friend of ours. I started my company around the same time he opened his restaurant. And although our industries were different, we always supported each other. Sadly, he passed away too soon, even though his son's cooking was great. Karen has had a tough time, it seems. The president had been a regular at Karen's family cafeteria since her father's time, and Mary had worked there as well. Karen was still very young at the time, so she doesn't remember me, though. For the interview, Karen brought 2 sample boxed lunches, and both the president and Mary said they were reminded of the original flavors from the past. Karen's boxed lunches tasted just like her father's cooking. We ended up spending most of the interview reminiscing about the old days. The boss muttered, and Mary nodded with a pleased expression. From the look of things, it seemed certain that Karen would be hired, but neither the next day or the day after did Karen's boxed lunches sales resume, and I found myself worrying unnecessarily. A week later, I spotted Karen during lunch at the employee cafeteria, and I was both surprised and delighted to see her. It was a busy lunchtime, so I couldn't get a chance to talk to her, but Karen seemed to be working with a cheerful smile on her face. That evening, during the cafeteria's night shift, I eagerly asked Mary for an update. Karen's now working until 3 p.m., just like she wanted. I felt relieved hearing that. And it seems Jim was able to start going to the child care center too. They had informed her of the job offer that evening, and the very next day, Jim began transitioning back into child care with short visits to get him comfortable again. As Jim got used to it, Karen stayed with him at first, gradually increasing the time until finally, he was fine without her being there. And today was her first full day back to work. It also explained why she'd paused her boxed lunches sales. I'm happy she got the job, but it's a shame we won't be able to get those boxed lunches anymore. Mary seemed to share my sentiment. Right. It's such a waste, but we're actually preparing to sell Karen's boxed lunches here at work. I really hoped that would come true. I became even more diligent about managing my schedule, ensuring that I almost always had my lunch at the employee cafeteria. At first, Karen seemed a bit lost, adjusting to the new work, and she looked tired. But after a few months, Karen had settled in as if she'd been working at the cafeteria for years. It seemed that there were even some employees who came to the cafeteria just to see her smile. Now that I think about it, Karen was often approached by other employees, and she always responded warmly. While I was happy for her, I couldn't deny that something inside me felt a bit unsettled. Men don't look good when they get jealous. I was sitting alone in the cafeteria having dinner, when Mary approached me with a slightly teasing smile. No, I'm not jealous or anything. Karen just seems happy. And that's great. I'm just a fan of her boxed lunches, that's all. Karen's boxed lunches were limited to 10 servings a day, starting at 10:30 a.m. On days when I had work in the office in the morning, I would buy a boxed lunch and take it with me to visit clients. Karen seems well, and I can still enjoy her boxed lunches, so I'm content with that. Mary could see right through my bluff. She looked at me knowingly before sharing something else. Karen's reopening her cafeteria. She said she wants to make sure people like you, living alone, get a proper dinner. She's going to serve plate meals at the cafe, plus she'll have boxed lunches for takeout too. Her business hours would be short, from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m., or until she sold out of the 30 meals she prepared. Hearing that it was starting tonight, I hurried out of the employee cafeteria. When I arrived at her cafeteria, there were 4 women inside eating plate meals, and there were stacks of boxed lunches on the counter. Welcome. Karen greeted me brightly. The voice was so full of energy now, it was hard to believe it was from the same person who had spoken so timidly when we first met. Since I had already had dinner at the employee cafeteria, I decided to buy a boxed lunch. From the next day onwards, my routine became lunch at the employee cafeteria and dinner at Karen's cafeteria. Karen's omelets and pot au feu were dishes I could eat every day without ever getting bored. And for the main course, there were now the meat and fish dishes that Mary had taught Karen to cook. It was my ideal meal. As I continued to go there regularly, Jim started sitting at my table more often. We'd eat dinner together, and sometimes I'd even help him with his homework when he asked. More than a year had passed since we first met, and now Jim was in elementary school. "Tom, thank you so much for everything you do." Karen poured me a cup of coffee. "No, I should be the one thanking you for everything. Really, we appreciate you so much every day." This was our usual exchange, and every time we went through this routine, Jim would smile happily. Helping Jim with his homework like this made me feel that my life was more fulfilled, and my sales numbers at work were improving too. Even my boss had complimented me. That day, I knew I'd have to work late, so I had already resigned myself to having dinner at the employee cafeteria again instead of Karen's. It's been, 3 years since Karen started working at the employee cafeteria. She's become quite popular around here. Mary's words made me feel proud, as I was the one who had introduced her to the job. But Mary didn't seem entirely pleased with my reaction. "Tom, you realize Karen is beautiful and still single, don't you? Don't let your guard down, or someone else might snatch her away." I felt my face flush with heat. Well, Karen's not a thing, so it's not like she can be taken by someone else. Even as I said that, I couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy inside. I had been content with seeing Karen at lunch and dinner, eating her food, and thinking that was enough to make me happy. Had I been too complacent? No. When we first met, Karen often cried, remembering the husband she had lost. I remember those early days so clearly, and that's why I had kept my feelings for her in check. But romantic feelings? Yes, I had been in love with Karen for a long time. Ever since Mary brought it up, I started to become more self-conscious and found it harder to relax at Karen's cafeteria. I'd rush through my meals and leave without saying much. That pattern went on for a while. I even started to sense that Karen seemed a little disappointed by my behavior. But one day, Jim stopped me for the first time in a while, and I found myself sitting down to enjoy a slow cup of coffee. I like math, but I hate English. Looking at his notebook, I could see he was struggling to balance the way the words looked on the page. You just have to practice writing them more until it feels natural. As I said this, Karen walked by and added, "See, Tom's right. Keep practicing, and you'll get it." Jim lowered his voice, making sure Karen couldn't hear. "Mom's always nicer when you're here. You should come every day, even on weekends." I hesitated, knowing that the cafeteria wasn't open on weekends. And then Jim asked, "This Sunday, I'm going fishing with some friends. Can you come too, Tom?" Apparently, Karen had told him it wasn't safe to go alone with just the other kids. "Yay, you really shouldn't be playing by the river without an adult around." I agreed with Karen on that. In the end, after Jim asked me to, I went fishing with him the following Sunday. From then on, I started spending time with Jim and Karen outside of the employee cafeteria. By the way, I still haven't been able to confess my feelings. It's not like I've forgotten what Mary told me, to stay alert. Jim had already started his 3rd grade. On the way back from our fishing trip, Jim's words caught me off guard. "Tom, you like Mom, don't you? Why don't you marry her?" Why, I mean, marriage isn't that simple. We're friends, right? But if you marry Mom, then you'll be my dad, right? Jim looked at me intently. Yay, but what if she says no? It's embarrassing to be nervous in front of a kid. I think you'll be fine, Tom. But if you wait too long, who knows what might happen? When we arrived back home, Jim suddenly declared to both Karen and me, I'm fine eating lunch by myself tomorrow. I'll do my homework too. So, Tom, take Mom out on a date. Karen and I exchanged glances. Karen's face started turning red. I couldn't just stay quiet after all the help Jim had given me. Karen, would you like to go out for lunch tomorrow? Yes. Okay, I'll pick you up at 11 a.m. Yes. The next day, when I arrived to pick her up, Karen had a more radiant air than usual. Maybe it was the makeup or the brightly colored clothes she was wearing. Her hair was soft and carried a lovely fragrance. My heart started racing. But having seen her every day for over 3 years, the nerves didn't last long. At the restaurant, we enjoyed our meal, chatting about the ingredients and the cooking techniques. Then, just before dessert, I finally proposed. Karen smiled, tears welling up, and nodded. I did it. In that moment, it felt like the whole world was celebrating with me. We didn't have a wedding ceremony or reception, but my colleagues threw a big party at Karen's cafeteria to celebrate. Our CEO and Mary came as special guests. A year has passed since then. Even now, I ate dinner at a small table in the corner of the store, with Jim doing his homework beside me. The difference now is that after Jim finishes his homework, we go home together. I help Jim take his bath, and then I go out to pick up Karen. Every day, we talk about what happened during the day as we head home together. And it makes me so happy. Soon, Karen will be taking maternity leave. Mary congratulated her with a big smile. I still haven't found anyone to replace her yet. But she also complained. Today is Karen's checkup day. I came home, worried about the results. Dad, welcome back. Mom and the baby are both doing great. I made dinner today. Karen was there smiling, and on the table were the hamburgers Jim had made and the stew Karen had prepared. It all looked so delicious.